We're going to be starting in Luke chapter 16, starting in verse 1. The Bible reads, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. I tell you, use your worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Okay. So right off the bat, we see some problems with this parable. Okay. We see a man who was accused of wasting his master's possessions. We should note that this man was a manager or a steward of his master's possessions. That means this job that he was given, he was entrusted with a great amount of responsibility. If you think back to Genesis 39, Joseph was put in charge of all of Potiphar's things. So much so that Potiphar did not even concern himself with anything except food. We sort of think about this and we can kind of imagine that that's the kind of responsibility that was given to this man. I mean, I don't know about you. It's hard for me to fathom or imagine having that level of responsibility over someone's entire estate. Okay? Some of you, maybe for your jobs, have quite literally been entrusted with the wealth of another, or maybe your company's wealth. So it's a little easier for you to understand, but still, even entrusting the cooking, the cleaning, the payment of your personal bills, is hard to fathom handing over that type of responsibility. Yet, this man had that kind of responsibility. His master, who appeared to have extraordinary wealth, entrusted him with all of this responsibility, and it appears as though he was on the verge of getting fired, for he was accused of mishandling that wealth. We don't know exactly how he wasted his master's possessions. We don't even know, how that happened, if he was giving himself a little extra cash on paydays, or we don't know if he was helping himself to extra food or other things or whatever it was. But it was significant enough that it got his master's attention. And so the master prepares to fire him, and as he's preparing to fire him, he actually requires him to give an account of his mishandling. I don't know about you, but this seems a little bit odd. If I was the master, I would not trust my dishonest manager to give an honest account of his mishandlings. But nonetheless, we see that the master had given him that one last task. We will see here that Jesus is emphasizing the need for this man to give an account of the things he mismanaged. We'll come back to this idea later. Moving on, after hearing this, he was losing his job. He decides to do something very deceptive and cunning. After doing some personal reflection, he realizes, I'm weak. I'm scrawny. I can't dig for money. And I won't beg. I have too much dignity for that. So he devises a plan. He thinks to himself, I know I need to make some allies for myself. So when I get fired from this job, someone else will welcome me into their home, and I'll be set. I'll be good to go. No begging, no digging for me. And so he does that. And it's the master's turn to respond to what he did. And he says, "You wicked, lazy, ungrateful servants." No, actually, he doesn't say that. To our surprise, he does not say that. The master doesn't even acknowledge the dishonesty here, the deceit. Instead, he commends the servant for acting shrewdly. He says, "For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light." You know, shrewd here is an interesting word. This word, shrewd, is sometimes translated as wisdom, prudence, sensible, and intelligent. It means someone who displays inner insight in a practically wise way. I think it's important to note here that Jesus is not commending dishonesty. He's not applauding stealing money to get ahead. That is not in the character of Jesus. He is truth and he is grace, both of those things. So he can't be commending dishonesty. So what on earth then is Jesus meaning? There are a few takeaways from this parable that I'd like to share with you. The first is an unlikely person. In life, we interact with any number of different people. Coworkers, work friends, bosses, employees, maybe your insurance agent, your mechanic, your advisors, your clients, your children, your in-laws, your parents, and anything and everything in between. And for much of that time, we spend with people that aren't a part of the church. People that don't necessarily believe what we believe. And so, as I sort of think about that, the question that comes to my mind is this: where is God during those times? If we are spending most of our time with people that don't believe what we believe, 9 to 5, and it's not that we're unspiritual, it's just the nature of living, right? We interact with many people, but if we're in that environment for a large majority of our day, where is God? What is he doing in that time? Is he off taking a nap until a meeting of the body? Like, no. Jesus said that God is always at work. So God must be doing something. You see, Jesus had quite the habit of using sort of these unsavory characters to emphasize a point. We see the story of the prodigal son. We see the poor woman with 2 copper coins. We see the story of the woman caught in adultery. We see the woman who washed Jesus' feet with her hair. Jesus would often speak his truth through the last person we would think he would speak it through. We as disciples, Christians, we must understand that we are not beyond learning lessons from people we mostly disagree with. We can disagree on lifestyle. We can disagree on theology. We can disagree on religion entirely. Yet there is something to learn from everyone, and God is not afraid to use an unlikely person to emphasize points. In this parable, Jesus used a dishonest manager who got ahead by dishonest means. And the truth is, if you're thinking to yourself, well, Jesus, isn't this the exact person we're trying not to be? You'd be correct in thinking that. Yet at the same exact time, if we get stuck on the manager's sin, you might miss the message God is trying to tell you. You see, the problem was the Pharisees who were listening on in the crowd. They believed themselves to be above any lesson Jesus had to offer. They believed themselves to be above certain types of people. And that was part of their problem. They viewed themselves in such high regard that they would not even consider the possibility that there was something new to learn. They viewed themselves as healthy people, not in need of a doctor, so that they set themselves up above others, ethically, morally, and spiritually. Remember, Jesus used parables to hide spiritual truth from those unwilling to listen. He hid the truth behind those whose hearts remained hard. And so in this instance, he hid spiritual truth behind characters that would be repugnant to some listening. But to others who were truly willing to listen with humility, they would hear the message of God. Now this takes some spiritual discernment. This takes some spiritual maturity. This sort of requires the same skill we use when reading books from people with opposing views. It requires us the ability to parse through the ungodliness of some to discover the image and truth of God in them. We must remember that God will never send us a message that is contradictory to his character and what we see lived out through Jesus' life. I want to share a story with you. I had a coworker who became a very good friend of mine. Now he had a largely rejected religion as his father was a pastor who lived a hypocritical lifestyle. And so from the get-go, I kind of understood his stance. Now, professionally, there was a lot to admire, and later I would discover that there were even some things ethically and morally that I could admire. While he regularly cursed and subscribed to many sort of typical American pastimes at his social drinking and other things, he was genuine. And so one day at our job, our boss, who had a reputation of favoring men over women, had instructed us to sort of meet together, that he was going to come and sort of disseminate some information. And as all of the team members were meeting at this place, mind you, our team was actually comprised of mostly women. So the only two men in our team of about 8 was me and my coworker. We were the only 2 men. So as they were meeting, my boss comes in, goes immediately to my coworker, gives the information only to him, while the rest of us and the remainder of the women there sat just like ignored. Now, this wasn't the first instance like this. My coworker goes home and comes back the next week, and he comes to us and he says, I just wanted to let you know I made a formal complaint to HR. And you could see the relief that the women there felt. Like, finally, someone somewhere did something. And as I was a witness to this, I couldn't help but think, man, isn't this what Christians are supposed to do? Isn't that what we're meant to do? Isn't that our calling, to be a voice for the voiceless? And it stuck with me. A little later on, he would tell me, he's like, yeah, I ever since that moment, administration has treated me differently. There were consequences to the decision that he chose. He was willing to accept that, to do what was right. And so for me, I took that as a lesson, like in humility, like, wow, that I can learn something from him. That if there's something difficult that I need to do as a Christian, as my calling, that I need to do so, even if there are consequences on the horizon. It was truly, truly convicting. We must remember that God is looking to speak truth to us in a variety of ways. And we must be humble enough to listen and know that those lessons can come from even an unlikely person. Now, something else we can learn from this parable is to plan with a purpose. You guys with me? We remember as kids the game of hide and go seek, yeah? Remember hiding and hearing the words, ready or not, here I come. While as a kid, this might have produced feelings of excitement and thrill. Even the child in that situation had to be prepared for someone to potentially come and find them. I believe the same could be said of our lives here on earth. You see, Jesus will be returning. And we must be prepared for his return, when we will have to face the master and account for what we did while on earth. In this parable, Jesus was trying to teach us to be prepared for our future life. That is, life after death. He was teaching us to plan today with that final day in mind. James Boyce, writing the parables of Jesus, said it like this. There is only one way the manager is set before us as an example, and that is in his ability to see what was coming and plan for it. In that one characteristic, though he was certainly far from commendable in other ways, he was eminently wiser than countless people who perhaps never cheated anyone out of anything, yet failed to plan for that moment when they must, each one, give an accounting before God. One of the few admirable things about the manager was that upon realizing his future was in trouble, he began to assess his resources, his options, in order to make a plan. Now, there were a number of ways he could have reasoned out of this. He could have reasoned out of the inevitable. He could have said, maybe I'll find a job elsewhere. Hey, I'll be okay. Maybe my master will just forgive and forget. Maybe that'll be the case. Or maybe I'll just beg him and maybe he'll give me a job elsewhere in his estate, doing something different. Or maybe I'll just lay low for 3-4 months. It'll blow over and I can keep my job. No, we don't see any of that from him. But what we do see is a man that saw his lot in life with a certain clarity. He made no justification for his actions. He did not refute the accusations one bit or try to hide the evidence. He knew that he was caught and that judgment was coming. He knew he would be held accountable and that as a result, his future was not secure. I think today there are a lot of made up things about how that day will go. Some people think that, if I just follow my own plan, I take a little bit from this religion, a little bit from that ideology, I'll be good on that day. Or some people may think, I was a good person. I tried to do good things. Sure, I messed up, but I'll be okay. Or the idea that all religions lead back to one God. People think this. Not only is this just wrong and irresponsible, it is an evil scheme of Satan to lead people away from God. The reason I say it's irresponsible is because instead of looking at what God really has to say about salvation, these people can choose to believe made up ideas taken from the world around them. Instead of just being honest and taking an honest look at what God actually has to say about how that day will go. That person sort of buying into this ideology either shows very little concern for their future life, or at the very least, they have assumptions about how that day will go that they fail to assess correctly. Instead, I think it is clearly a better strategy to prepare yourself for what is to come today, to ensure that your life has been reconciled and redeemed by God, and that our life reflects what we believe. In the book Sacred Rhythms, Ruth Haley Barton says it like this: many of us have more clearly developed plans for finances, further education, home improvement, and physical fitness than we do our spiritual lives. I think for some of us here that this is true. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't plan for this life too. It is wise to do so. Yet, at the same time, we must consider, have I thought out those plans? Have I given more energy to those things than I have my spiritual well-being? Put another way, you need to ask yourself, do I need to reevaluate the plan that I have for my spiritual well-being? Where is your plan today? What does your plan look like? For both Christians and non-Christians, it is advisable that we learn to create a plan for our spiritual growth. Spiritual growth will not happen on its own. We have both an active part and a passive part. A passive part in which God plays a central role, and an active part in which we must be a participant in the process. If we are going to follow this particular quality of the manager, we need to assess our resources and make a plan for our spiritual lives. Are you here today struggling with anger, impatience, lust? These things will not magically go away. Can God do that if he so chooses? He's God. He can do whatever he wants. However, that does not seem to be his preferred method of action. Instead, I think he seeks to build character, perseverance, faith, which Peter says is of greater worth than gold, by the way, so that we can prepare ourselves for the next life where he is ruler and king. 2 Corinthians 5:10. This is a reminder for us all, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. It is an unquestionable fact that we will meet God one day. Are you prepared to meet God on that day? One final thing that I believe we can learn from this parable is to use your possessions with purpose. By possessions here, I mean resources. I mean whatever God has put at your disposal. Jesus here seems to indicate the importance of using our resources for our friendships. One commentary I looked at suggested that friends here indicates people that we may serve in this life, whether that be the poor, whether it's to church or your neighbor. This is not to say, right, that Jesus is saying we buy our friends, right? We buy our friendships. That can't be what he's saying. But rather that we serve people by whatever means we have, by whatever gifts God has given to us, because we know that our impact may very well echo into eternity. And so although money and things cannot be taken into the next life, how we use those things for the kingdom can have an impact in the next life. The fruit that we produce while using the things at our disposal can remain and have impact eternally. And so while the manager in this story used his position to gain for himself allies, to get ahead, we see that friendship is a way that we invest in the life to come. It is akin to Matthew 25. Where Jesus wants us to serve the less fortunate as a means of showing our love to him. Think about your own life for a second. I am certain that you can think of people in this life that you have impacted by the love that you shared with them. People that you have impacted and thereby impacting every subsequent generation thereafter. I'm certain that there are people here that can think about that. I'm not talking about just studying the Bible. I mean, really loving people here. Truly loving people by welcoming them into your home, sharing a meal with them, or loaning a car, or I'm not sure, whatever it may look like, right? These things can have an eternal impact on the people around you. This church, Mercer, Central Shore, has lived out this truth in amazing ways. And I have been the recipient of this love and service of others for many years. I think of Sammy Santiago, who has blessed many of us over the years with his generosity, whether it was allowing us to host groom honorings, teen events, campus events, or birthdays. He opened up his home and extended his love to us. For me, I think of Joel and Roberta Mascabetto. When I was a young Dominican boy that had no place to go and no place to lay his weary head, the Mascabettos opened up their home and allowed me to live there for several months. They gave me a place to live, water to drink, and the Mascabettos, coffee too. And I know that they have loved and served so many of those in and out of the church. I think of Nelson and Effie, who opened their homes in their house to both my brother, my biological brother, and my would-be spouse when we were dating, giving my brother and wife a place to rest their heads, food to eat, and guidance to accept. Without them, I don't know if this would have happened as fast as it did. And I can name so many others. I think of Linda Hardy, the Romans, Eddie Laura Jimenez, the Thompsons, the McLeods, the Olubamowos. Did I say that right? I love saying that last name. Sean and Allison Smith, the Phipps, the P. Mantels, and so many others that are a great example of this in our church. And so, the principal teaching here is that we must use our life and position on earth with purpose. We must utilize the gifts we have to serve those around us for the sake of the kingdom. And we learn that what we have been given has been simply put under our responsibility. And like the manager, we must be trustworthy with it. For there will come a day when we must give account for our handlings of those things. We must have concern for the life to come, and we must live today with that final day in view. This is not to say that that fear should run our lives, because we know that God's perfect love drives out that fear. But we must know that day is in fact coming. We must know that. That is an inescapable truth. We must understand that while we entrust our lot in the next life to God, He entrusts us to use our gifts in this life. And it will be a glorious day when this life passes and we are welcomed into eternal dwellings. Amen. When we know that the friends that we impacted, or the friends that have impacted us, right, that they will be there alongside God to welcome us into heaven. Amen. That will be an amazing day, truly. And so ultimately, what is Jesus commending in this parable? He commends the manager's ability to use his resources to plan for the future. We must use what God has given us, not as a means of manipulation or bribery, but as a means of showing God's love to the world. The prudent or shrewd way of handling things is to live today with our end goal in mind. Live today as though our eternity awaits, and live today as though our decisions echo into eternity. Thank you, guys.